welcome to the Doc and Pro Show. I'm Dr. Mark Kovacs. I'm here with my good mate, Jason Bone, and we're super excited today to have a legend with us, Mr. Gil Reyes. If you don't know Gil, he's been a big mentor of mine over many, many years, but he's also mentored, hundreds of world-class athletes. Probably most notable is his, over nearly 3 decades of time with Andre Agassi, but also was their head strength coach at UNLV when they won the national championship back in the 90s in basketball. And he's got a lot of great experiences. And above that is one of the nicest people you'll ever meet and cares about every single athlete that he works with. So Gil, we're super excited to have you here. Thanks for making the time. We know how busy you are, so it's awesome to have you here. And we're really excited to just talk about athletes, training, coaching, and really going into some areas that I don't think a lot of people touch on. And that's sort of that human connection between the coach and the athlete. And first off, thanks for being here.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's talk about anything and everything that comes, as we say, from the inside out, right, with our athletes. And I'm always excited and honored to be around you, Mark, because I always learn something for sure. And having the privilege of meeting Jason as well, I'm just excited to listen in and see what you guys can teach me in this period of time, because I'm a very, very hungry learner these days.
So I've got a question for you regarding you were the head strength coach at UNLV, best college basketball program that year and possibly in history. And you made a decision to leave that, one of the best jobs in strength and conditioning in the country, to work with a young, sort of unproven tennis player. How did you sort of make that decision? And I'm sure that was a difficult call to make.
Whenever you all or anyone in your audience has the inclination to have a pro career day, don't invite me. I made a decision based on absolutely nothing, no logic, no sense. I had never seen a tennis match before, literally had never seen a tennis match. And yes, and thank you for those nice words about our program. The Runnin Rebels, yes, that year we beat Duke in the national championship in Denver that year. And our basketball team was a juggernaut. The program was, with the recruits in those days, we really pretty much could have our pick. It was building, it was coming very nicely. And I had never seen a tennis match. Andre Agassi was born and raised in Las Vegas. Like so many people here in Las Vegas, he was a Runnin Rebel fan. We were a very exciting, successful basketball program. And he was a fan, so he came in to the weight room a couple of times just to see kind of what the guys were doing. Of course, he was very interested in his own physical development. He was a teenager, but he recognized he was really good. But he just kind of had a sense, kind of like good stockbrokers do, I guess, stock analysts, of what's ahead, what the trends are, what's going on in my sport. And he came in with a very, very strong instinctual, I guess, request, which is, I need to get bigger because the game's going to get bigger. And so I just liked the guy. I knew nothing about tennis. For those of you who are Jerry Seinfeld fans, it's George Costanza saying nothing. It's about nothing. Gil, what did you know about tennis? Nothing. Literally nothing. I've never seen a tennis match. And I just liked the guy. I liked the kid. He came in and he was eager. He was hungry. He was very intelligent. And Dr. Kovacs, you know him well by now. He's a really intelligent, insightful human. So he came in asking some awesome questions, especially for a young person. So I started with him as our season was kind of unfolding, but we knew we had something special at UNLV. Of course, Larry Johnson, Stacey Ogman, Greg Anthony, David Butler, you name them, we were really loaded. But he started coming in and seeing the way they train. He saw kind of the very distinct purpose with which each athlete walked into my weight room. And he liked the fact that it was a team, but it was individualized training. We train them individually because they are different. I've always said, if you train all your athletes the same, you're almost guaranteed to be 50% wrong 100% of the time. Sure. And he liked that because they're not the same. And he certainly was, as he proved out, he certainly was not an ordinary individual. He thought and played very much out of the box. So I like that. That was very interesting to me. And as soon as we completed our task, our mission, and won the national championship at UNLV, a couple of days later, I resigned and I started with, and of course, That's where the career day comes in. Work, 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 and get to the best situation you can, and then leave. And that's what I did. It was literally all the years of working to achieve that crest, achieve that peak in achievement, and I did. And in a matter of days, I resigned and started something about which I knew nothing. And the rest, as they say, is history. As far as I'm concerned, it changed my life completely. Andre taught me how to teach. In other words, he taught me how to learn him in order to teach him. And that just changed me in every way, professionally and personally, forever to this day.
So you and Andre have been together forever, and that doesn't happen very often anymore. And what is sort of the difference there? Because you hear about and you see it in all sports, coaches, trainers, therapists, they're changing every few months, once a year. There's all this change. And how are you able to sort of keep your relationship so strong over so many years through, I'm sure, a lot of ups and downs? What was sort of the ability to do that, and what can we and other people listening can learn from that?
So many ups and downs. And in Andre's case, because his life was quite public as he began, I guess, this trajectory of stardom, people paid attention to what he was doing, and most of it good, some of it not so good in terms of what was coming at him, either media-wise or public perception-wise. And it was just my opportunity to learn that part of coaching from the inside out. And I do agree with you so much on that premise that there's so much out there for us to learn still to this day. And with Andre, I sensed within him, I'll give you a kind of fast forward example now. I was just watching a movie probably for the 40th time a couple of nights ago on our cable movie networks. It's called McFarland USA. And it's about based on a true story out of Northern California, a cross-country track coach, and how he went into his sport knowing nothing. I draw so many parallels. And for me, culturally, the theme of that, of the movie is in a, let's say, somewhat underprivileged area, underserved area, and where they were not getting individual attention, at least as the story is told. But this one coach sought to deal with each athlete on his terms. It was a boys' high school cross-country team, to learn them, to learn who they are, where they're from, why they are the way they are, to learn that from them. And in doing so, he got the best out of them. I truly believe that what I saw in Andre, there's this old story, and I'll be very quick, sorry, I don't want to be so long-winded, but you're talking about one of my favorite subjects in the world, which is Andre Agassi, just because of how much I love the boy, but just what a great man he made himself at that point, because he felt the freedom within himself to make mistakes, to take risks that would bring the best out of him. He did not live in a safety bubble. He did not live within the box. He chose greatness. There was greatness out there. And I truly believe, I might be biased, but I truly believe that he saw it. Once he saw it out there, he chose to seek and pursue and battle for greatness and goodness, I might say. Greatness in terms of as an athlete, but goodness in terms of a person. What he did, there's a book out there, and it's called A Season of Life by Jeffrey Marks. And this is one of our favorite themes since he was a teenager, which Andre and I just discussed for so many years to this day still. There's a book called Season of Life. And once again, I've never met the gentleman. I know nothing about it other than how it touched me and Andre. There's a high school football coach, again, in an underprivileged area. It's a high school football coach. And the boosters were having a get together to start the season, as booster clubs always do for high school football teams. And I'll paraphrase it to make it quick. He was asked, and it was a high school football team of troubled youth, difficult circumstances. He was asked by one of the boosters, the parents, "Coach, how good is this year's team going to be?" And he said, "We won't know that for 10 or 20 years when we see what they do when they leave here, when we see how many lives they touch, when we see what they do to help other people, to see what kind of family men they become." That has stayed with me, because now you can draw Andre Agassi within that definition of what he did when he was done with his sport as let's say competing actively on the men's tour, how many people he's helped, how many lives he's changed literally with opportunity as an, let's say, offspring or offshoot of his opportunity. So with Andre, that became our quest. Of course, it had to be about tennis. You had to succeed. As they say, you have to do well before you can do good. And so Andre had to succeed. And that was a choice that he made because he felt like by more success, he would be more able to help others. And to this day, that continues to be his quest. And I'm still fortunate enough to interact with him and his family throughout the day, many days. So that remains an inspiration. And I'm still convinced that was the tenet. That was the premise upon which our relationship not only was built, but by which it has survived for decades. And we still continue to dream out loud together because there's something more than just hitting the ball, something more than that. And if you hit the ball well enough, you get to do perhaps a little more good for others.
Very well said.
Yeah, that's great. So how much do you know about golf? Because if it's nothing, you're hired. Because I mean, it sounds like, are you ready for another career change right now? Because we go to golf and no, I think I'm still so fascinated that you could go and know nothing about tennis. And I mean, never have watched a tennis match and still that's the most fascinating part of the whole story is that there was no tennis in there at all. And to train this young man at this time to become one of the greatest to ever play the game is just, that's really, really fascinating. And that takes some big kahunas to step away from a spot where you were in a really good professional situation and go all that route. And so that's just.
And just for people listening, how old was Andre when you left UNLV?
Well, Andre, when I met him, when I started with him, we won the national championship in 1990. So he was 19 years old at that time when I left. But I had actually met him almost a year and a half before that, and had already started helping him at UNLV. I was working with him at UNLV. So he was at the last part of his 17, early parts of his 18th year, is when we started spending time together, just discussing the journey, discussing the challenge, kind of who he was. But every bit as important with our young athletes, our young people in general. That's a time when they're really trying to figure out who they are, right? We all get that. We've been through that. That's when you try to figure out who you are. But it's not a bad time to figure out who it is you wish to be. I was one of those people. I did not speak English till I was around 12, and I grew up in a community that was, once again, perhaps certainly socioeconomically underprivileged. You feel like you're limited by your environment. You feel like that's who you are. Your environment is who you are, and to many, I guess, to a large extent, it should be. But on the other hand, that should not be your restriction, your limitation. It should certainly not be a handicap. It should be an inspiration. And with Andre, he had so much going on in his life, on the court and off the court. And the more we discussed that, the more we realized there was you could not be more different than Andre and I. We were age and just circumstances, I guess, basic attitudes, certainly talent levels. He was an extremely talented individual, and I was extremely not talented individual, and everything aligned, and where we balanced each other out. And so, yes, he was still that teenager at 19 when I did leave, resign from UNLV and embark on the tour. And I would sit with his brother, Philip, during the matches early in my days on the road, and literally have to ask him what just happened. Is that good? Is that bad? And okay, now where are we? What do we need to do now to win? And I still look back on it saying, you're right, that was a leap of faith.
Wow.
But I look at Andre and see indeed what he did as an athlete, what he overcame as an athlete, and what he achieved as a human being. And it just could not have worked out better for me.
Could you give folks a little bit of a background of how you got to UNLV? Because I think to me that's a really interesting story. Your background, how you got into sports, and how you sort of transitioned into a great strength coach.
Well, thank you. I always have to look back for the same, I guess, when you notice the similarities, the tenets of our stories, right? Who? Along the way, who? Along the way, what circumstances, what events, but who was a beacon of light for you, perhaps somebody, a conductor to your efforts that was the difference. And in my case, it was a high school coach named Milt Davis, may he rest in peace, in Los Angeles. He was our high school football coach. And he was a person who he had been quite a successful athlete himself. In the 50s, he had been an All-American at UCLA, defensive back. Then he played for them, the Baltimore Colts, in the NFL. So all of us, just scrawny high school kids, we just idolized the man. We idolized him. We would see him walk across campus and he had everybody's attention. He just had something about him. And then you got to know him. And he was one of those, a purveyor, let's say, of accountability. He would, to each one of us, he would ask me, for example, why I hung around with those guys that I did. He says, why? Why do you hang around with people who expect so little from you? And I didn't get it, but he was planting the seeds. And he said, are you afraid to hang around with people who expect more from you? You've gotten very comfortable hanging, because he would see us at lunch, and me with my homies there sitting in the lunch area. The same day, the same group of homies just sitting around doing really nothing. And he would confront me and he would ask me about that for, let's say, the sake of accountability. But he wouldn't preach to me. He would just ask me, he says, think about it. Everything I said is, I want to make a future for my mother. And he says, is this how you plan on doing it? Because that's not going to work. He says, you need to get engaged with your experience now in education. And anyway, fast forward, all of a sudden I realized that, well, wait a minute, maybe I could do a little something. We were poor, certainly financially, but my mom says, we're not poor. We just don't have any money, but we're not poor. You're poor if you're mean. You're poor if you abuse other people, then you're poor. We don't do either of those. We just don't have any money. So that's when I started taking a good look at the picture. And next thing I knew, I was at University of California, Santa Barbara, where the education level was quite high, but there was also a lot going on socially in those days and politically, the Vietnam eras and the protests and everything. So I began to question everything. I loved it. I questioned everything, but not in a rebellious sort of way, just in a way I wish to learn. Why can't we do it another way? Okay, but here's what we're going to do. Why? Just please tell me why. And hopefully, I'm hoping that most of my athletes now will tell you that that's what I encourage them here. I encourage them to question me. I encourage them, what is the why? Just don't do it because you're told to do it. Once an athlete understands the why, an athlete is, for the most part, you got to figure they're there for a reason. They're motivated to be there. They just now need the help. Perhaps they need quite a bit of development, or even, let's say, some sort of redirection. And everything became about why. And the way I ended up in my opportunities was literally, in my days, they did not have strength coaches in my days when I was in college and graduating. The NSCA, for example, didn't start till 5 years after I graduated from college in 78. I graduated in 73. But everything
folks listening, the NSCA is the National Strength and Conditioning Association. Yeah. It's sort of the overarching body that oversees strength coaches in the US.
Yes, and everything was why. I wanted to know why. And if you couldn't, for example, if you lift a weight a certain way, what are you doing? What is the compromise? What's the buyout now? And I discuss that now with our strength coaches today. What is the science behind this? Or are you saying, well, wait a minute, I can do this with this. If I push it this way, it'll affect this muscle. If I pull it this way, it'll affect that muscle. I'm one of those guys that's very inquisitive to say, well, why can't we perhaps have some equipment that will conform to our mechanical alignments or our actual kinesis or our movement? Why can't we do that? And I started trying to do that in my garage, in my shop, and the athletes seemed to respond, not so much to my craftsmanship, not so much to my welding abilities, but to my intent on aligning our equipment with their specifics that would be perhaps joint friendly, ligaments and tendons as well, of course. And so I would just sit and just ask why. To this day, I still do it because I'm learning more. Jason, I'm started working with some golf people now, and there's a young man He's still a teenager who just turned pro this year as a golfer. A typical day for us this week is we have professional soccer players coming in here. Professional baseball player, Alex Verdugo, plays for the Boston Red Sox, who was just here yesterday. And of course, our professional tennis players, and soccer and golf and tennis and baseball. I don't know anything about any of those sports, but I ask so many questions. I think they kind of crack up. I think they're a little maybe unsettled when they come in to be trained by me, that I'm the one asking them all the questions. And to me, you guys here, and Dr. Kovacs, you above all, you're the person from whom I learned the most professionally over so many years now. I'm so blessed to learn from you. It's you encourage why. You encourage the questions, because forgive me, this is the last one I'll throw in there. There's a Lebanese writer, philosopher named Khalil Gibran, who says, if a teacher is truly great, he does not bid you to enter the house of his wisdom. Rather, he leads you to the threshold of your own. And I always like that. He's not going to tell you what's right and wrong. He's going to teach you how to seek what's right and wrong. And that's always been a template for me. I don't know how successful I've been, but it certainly has led to some great conversations with our athletes in here, and they still continue to this day. And I'm hoping the two of you will be here in our gym very soon so we can have some of these conversations in person.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like your mom was very much like that philosopher. She taught you the why, right? That's amazing. That's awesome.
Yes. Have your why when you're anywhere, when you're in a classroom, when you're out there on the golf course, when you're in a weight room, when you're in the track. Okay, why? It's so much easier to deal with everything if you're strong in your why, and you're surrounded by those, let's say, by whom your questions are not threatened, or don't feel threatened rather by your questions. And once you know that, it's a matter of you see the road more clearly. When we're landing at the airport and we look down at night and we see those lights there, we're glad they're there. That's a runway. That's where we want to go. And here's why we want to stop there. It's very clear. Couldn't be more clear, right? Well, same in your life. When someone is, let's say, redirecting your efforts or your time or even your attitudes. If the why is clear between the two of you, yourself and your coach, it's not necessarily guaranteed that it's going to be smooth sailing, but it's guaranteed pretty much by then you've decided that you're clear on the path you're taking and you're ready to take on any obstacles in the path. And that remains to me, as a strength coach, the strongest tenet. Ask my athletes why. What makes them go? Why do I cry at these movies of seeing these inspirational stories of athletes overcoming so much and then reaching their success? I'm one of those guys. I still cry, man. I see a good movie like that, I'll sit there and cry, and I'm eating a bologna sandwich and eating a bag of potato chips and drinking my root beer, but I'm crying and wiping tears off while I'm crying watching the movies. And I think that's the best part of us. And I think you two gentlemen know that probably more than anybody. The best part of us is inside here, the inside out.